They quickly went to tell the emperor, and the princess overheard, for she had now regained consciousness. Then Trant said, "Tell me how the princess is." Hippolytus answered, "Very well, my lord. She's recovered now." "I'm sure she is," said Trant. "Her illness could not be great. A few days ago she had things she wanted a great deal, but now I don't think she will brag much about them. She's not the first to do this, nor will she be the last. I know very well that she's not made of iron. Oh, how painful it is for a man not to be able to share his grief." At this moment the emperor came in, followed by all the ladies with the empress, and they all asked him how he was. But he did not want to answer anyone. They were all astonished that he had not answered the greetings of the emperor or the ladies, and continued to show his grief as he began to lament. "Oh, Son of God, all-powerful Jesus, I am dying of love, and you wish to die for love to free mankind. You suffered so much pain, lashings, wounds, and torments, and my pain was the sight of a black moor. Outside of you, Lord, who can compare with my love? Lord, your Holy Mother, Our Lady, suffered great pain at the foot of the cross, and I stood with a cord in my hand, with two mirrors that represented Lord, the greatest pain of any Christian has ever endured." The emperor and all the ladies were in the room along with the cardinal and many other clergymen, and they were all astonished at the pious words they heard Trant saying. Then Trant lowered his head and began to lament again, because death was calling him. The doctors ordered many things for him, but they did not help. Hearing of his illness, an old Jewess came to the emperor and very boldly said, "Your Majesty sees that Trant's life is near its end. All the doctors have given up hope, and I am the only one who can help him. Call the soldiers together and have them start shouting and go into his chambers and beat their swords against their shields. When he wakes up and sees so many armed men and hears them shouting, and he asks what is happening, you can tell him that the Turks are at the gates of the city. Then all these thoughts of his will disappear, and with that virtue he has, and out of fear of being shamed, he will get up." The emperor sent for his doctors and his wise men and explained what the Jewess had advised. They all agreed that it would be worth trying. The shout and the uproar were so loud in the city that Trant heard it even before they came into his chamber. The Jewess, who stood at the head of the bed, told him, "Get up, my captain. Don't be afraid of death. Here are your enemies, the Turks, at the gates to the city, and they're coming to take revenge on you." When Trant heard the old lady saying this, he said, "Is it true that the Turks are so close?" "They're even closer than you think," said the Jewess. "Get up. Go to the window and you'll see what they plan to do to you." Trant immediately called for his clothes, and he had his leg bound with towels. Then he put his armor on as best he could and mounted his horse along with many other men. He was so ready and willing to fight that his illness went almost entirely away. The emperor and the doctor who were there told him to take some restoratives, and that would make him better able to do battle. He did everything they advised him, and then he realized that it had all been contrived to help him get over his illness. Trant said, "Praise be to God! A woman has delivered me from the arms of death, for another woman had killed me." With all the noise of the soldiers raised, the princess ran to her mother's chamber. They saw the emperor coming back with Trant, and all the ladies looked out the windows to see what had happened. When Trant was in front of the princess's window, he lifted his head and put both hands over his face. The empress asked his daughter why Trant had covered his face, because the only reason that was ever done was when a love affair had gone wrong. The princess answered that she didn't have any idea. After they had gone by and were all at the palace door, the emperor dismounted, and Trant begged his leave to go to his lodging. The emperor did everything he could to make Trant dismount, telling him that he would be given everything he needed in the palace, but Trant insisted on leaving. The princess wondered why Trant did not want to stay in the palace despite all the emperor's pleas, for he had wanted to many times before. She also wondered why he had covered his face. When Trant reached his lodging, he immediately went to his room and called Lord Agramont and Hippolytus. He begged them to arm and provision 10 galley ships. They said that they would, and leaving Trant, they stocked the galleys. After Trant had eaten, he arranged everything for his departure. He ordered all his men to go by land to the castle of Malvais, and he would go by sea, and they would meet there. When it was evening and the doctors had left, they told the emperor that Trant was all right. When it was nearly the hour for prayer, the princess, upset that she did not see Trnt, asked Plesser de Mavia and Lady Montblanc to go to Trnt's lodging to find out what was wrong. As the maidens were coming, one of Trnt's pages saw them and quickly went into Trnt's chambers and said, "Cheer up, my lord! 2 gallant ladies are coming with a message from the princess." "Go right away," said Trnt, "and tell them I am all right, but that I am sleeping." The page did what he was told, for Trnt did not want to see them. When the maidens returned to the palace with the reply, the princess insisted so much that her mother and the emperor went to Trnt's lodgings, and when Trnt heard that the emperor was coming, he gave 2 pages instructions about what to do. When the emperor was at the door of his chamber, the more clever of the pages said, "Your Majesty should not come into the chamber because of the captain's sickness. He has not rested for so many days that he is catching up on all the rest he needs now. He is nearly drenched with sweat, and it would be good for a doctor to come in without awakening him." Trnt quickly got into bed, and he moistened his face with a wet cloth and pretended to be asleep. The doctor came in, and when he left again, he told the emperor, "My lord, it would be very harmful for us to awaken him now. Why doesn't your highness go now? Tomorrow morning you can come back and visit him." The princess could not take it calmly when she was not able to see Trnt, but she had to return with the emperor. When Trnt knew that they had all gone, he quickly got up and had all his clothing gathered and taken to the galley. At midnight he secretly went on board, and he would have liked to cast anchor then, but the ship was not ready. In the morning, when the sun came up, the emperor heard the galley trumpets giving the signal for the men to go on board. Trnt sent Lord Agramant to the emperor as his courtier. When he was before him, he gave him the following message: "Your captain has gone on board one of the galleys, and has ordered the ships to go to the port of Transimino. He will go by ship to the castle of Melve, while the soldiers go there by land. I have been sent here to tell your highness about his decision to leave." The emperor answered, "Knight, I am very happy to have this good news, and I give many thanks to divine goodness for bringing health to our captain so that he can leave. This is what I wanted most in the world after the salvation of my soul." Lord Agramant kissed his hand and begged his leave. Then he went to the empress's chamber and bade her farewell, and did the same to the princess. When the empress saw that Hippolytus would have to go, and that the princess saw that Trnt was leaving, they shed bitter tears, especially the princess, because Trnt was going without a word to her. They quickly went to the emperor's chamber to see if it was true that they were leaving, and the emperor told them everything. The princess urged the emperor to go to the water's edge so that she could go along, and the empress did not dally. The emperor reached the sea before they did, and when he went on board ship begging Trnt to do everything he could for the empire, Trnt spoke to him very kindly and said he would do everything he could, and the emperor felt very relieved. All the soldiers advised the emperor to go back on land quickly because a black cloud with thunder and lightning was coming their way. So the emperor went on land. The princess was sorry that she had not been there when her father went on the galley, so that she could have gone too and talked with Trnt. But now the sea was so choppy that the women were not allowed on board, nor would her father have given his permission. The princess, sighing deeply, and with tears streaming from her eyes, had no recourse other than to beg Plesser de Mavia to go on board the galley and find out why Trnt had left so secretly, without saying anything to her, and why he had placed his hands over his face as he passed by, and also why he had not wanted to stay in the palace, which he had wanted to do so many times before. Plesser de Mavia understood exactly what her lady wanted, and she got on a boat with Hippolytus and some others who were with him. The pain that the empress felt as she saw Hippolytus going on board the galley cannot be described. When Plesser de Mavia was on board, Trnt paid no attention to her, but she insisted and said to him, "O cruel knight, who has turned your thoughts to leave such a virtuous lady who has more dignity and virtue than anyone in the world without so much as telling her goodbye? If you want her life to be sad and to hasten her death, don't go back on land, don't look at her. But if you want to restore her bitter life, let her see your lordship for a short time." When she had said this, she could no longer hold back her tears, and she wrapped her cloak around herself and moaned softly, but would say no more. Trnt wanted to reply to what Plesser de Mavia had told him, and very softly, so that no one else could hear him, he said, Her beauty and her discretion so far surpasses all others that only a madman could compare anyone else with her. But I saw this lady with a black gardener, Lucetta, and she was not thinking of me at all. First I saw them kissing, and I was offended by the sight. Then I was even more shocked when I saw them embracing like lovers and going into a chamber. When they came back out, Widow Repose knelt down at her feet and put a silk scarf high under her skirt. Painful thoughts attacked my mind when I saw how he treated her. I don't know why I didn't kill someone right then, but the wall was in my way. But I could not take this terrible jealousy of the black gardener out of my mind, and I cut through his neck with my sword. Still the pain kept increasing, so much that I was beside myself, and I went into my chamber pretending to be terribly tired, so that I would be left alone. And now I want to be in the sea. I want my body to float, unburied, on the waves until it reaches the princess, so that she can dress me in my shroud with her delicate hands. Then he would say no more. When Placer de Mavia had heard what was bothering Trnt, and that the black gardener had been killed, and no one would know who did it unless she told them, she was very agitated. Still, she forced herself to smile, and with Hippolytus there, she said, "Even if you did see it, it was all a game to cheer up the princess. Widow Repose got some costumes from the plays for the Corpus Christi festivals, and I dressed up as our gardener." And she told him everything that had happened. Trnt was astonished by it all, and said he could not believe it. The maiden laughed and said, "My lord, the best thing would be for me to stay here while Hippolytus goes to my room. Under my bed he will find all the clothing of the black gardener, and if I'm not telling the truth, you can throw me into the ocean." Trnt told Hippolytus to take the keys and go, and to come back quickly because the sea was very choppy. Hippolytus did what Trnt commanded. When he came back with the clothing, the ocean swells were so high that Hippolytus could not board the galley, and Placer de Mavia could not go back on land. They threw a rope to the ship and tied the clothing of the black gardener to it, so that it could be pulled up to the galley. When Trnt saw the mask and the clothing, he saw all the wickedness of Widow Repose. He then swore in everyone's presence that if he could go on land just then, he would have her burned before the emperor, or he would do to her what he had done with the black man. Then Trnt begged Placer de Mavia to forgive the bad thoughts he had had about the princess and about her, and when she was with her highness to beg her forgiveness. Placer de Mavia agreed very graciously. Suddenly the sea became so stormy that the people who saw the boat Hippolytus was on began praying that it would not sink. It headed back to land, and the men on it were drenched while the boat was half filled with water. The wind and the rain were so strong and the waves were so high that the galley's ropes broke, and they were swept out to sea. 2 of the galleys remained there. The people on them were saved, but the ships were lost. 3 galleys that found themselves in the middle of the tempestuous sea had their masts broken and their sails torn apart. A gust of wind threw one of the galleys into a small island, and its men took refuge there. Trnt's galley and the other one were leeward. They could not make it to the island, and Trnt's galley found itself with its rudder smashed. The other galley was nearby, and it split apart. The men on board fell into the bitter sea, and all of them drowned. Trnt's galley continued towards Barbary, and the sailors lost their bearings and did not know what seas they were in, and they lamented loudly. Trnt heard the great cries the sailors were making, and he saw the galley's boatswain, who was the best of all sailors, commending his soul to God because a tackle block had fallen on his head. A galley slave got up and went to Trnt, and with great effort he said, "My lord, order the men to bail out the water in the galley. Here is your staff of authority. Hold it in your hand and run through the galley. The boatswain is dead, and all the men see that they are very near death and are fainting. Do everything you can to make them bail, because if we can get beyond the cape, we can save our lives. It is better for us to be captives of the Moors than to die." Trnt lifted his head and said, "What seas are we in?" "My lord," said the galley slave, as he pointed, "those are the seas of Sicily, and these are the seas of Tunis. And because you are a virtuous man, I'm sorrier for you than I am for myself. It is fortune's will that we shall perish on this Barbary coast, and in case like this, every man should beg forgiveness of the others." Trnt quickly got up, although the dreadful sea was crashing about him so that he was barely able to stand. Then he brought out the best clothing he had, and he dressed in it. He took a sack containing 1,000 ducats and put a note inside it that said, "I beg whomsoever shall find my body to give it honorable burial. I am Trnt Blnc from Brittany, and of that singular lineage of Roccasalada, high captain of the Greek Empire." By now it was already past noon, and the further the galley went, the more the water it took on. The cries increased, and death drew near. As they were near land, the Moors saw the galley approaching, and they realized that it would run aground just where they wanted it, while the Christians knew that they could not escape death or being captured. The galley came close to land, and all the men threw themselves into the sea to save their lives. By this time it was nearly dark of night. When Trnt saw the sailors jumping overboard, he decided not to leave the ship, no matter what might happen. And by then there was no boat, rope, or oar that had not been lost. Trnt begged 2 sailors, faithful friends of his who had come on the ship with him when it was stocked in Brittany, to take care of the maiden. They took off all her clothes, and by this time nearly all the galley was under water. Taking up a corkwood plank, the sailor tied it across her breasts, while the other man helped her stand up. The sea sent a wave crashing into Plesser Maria and the sailors, and hurled them about. The man carrying the plank drowned in order to save her. The other sailor helped the maiden as long as he could, and finally was forced to abandon her. It was her good fortune to find herself near land at night, and she could hear the loud noise the Moors were making as they captured the Christians. The maiden's feet touched bottom, and since she was all alone, she stopped and decided not to go ashore. Instead, she went closer to land so that she would not be in such deep water, but waves sometimes came crashing over her head. As she walked through the water close to shore, she moved away from the shouts, afraid she would be killed, for she saw that the Moors were killing each other as they tried to capture the most prisoners, and when lightning flashed she could see the reflection of swords near the sea. She continued to walk in the water, completely naked, following the shoreline, and whenever she heard anyone, she would duck underwater and stay there until they were gone.